Hello, and welcome to another installment of our Project Elevate series. The purpose of these sessions and workshops are to focus on particular topics and delve further into them to provide you with some additional best practice and ways of using our product that you might not actually be aware of. For today, we're focusing on understanding workflows, which I'm sure Chris will agree is a bit of an unsung hero within our threat modeling tool. So it's getting some worthy airtime today. Please do let us know if you have any questions. We'll monitor those as we go and we'll make sure that any are captured at the end. I'm very happy to introduce Chris Dalrymple, our Global Head of Solution Architects, who is ready to give you the grand tour on Irius Risk workflows. Please enjoy, and over to you, Chris.
All right, well, thank you so much, Claire. Yeah, and as she was saying, workflows are a little bit of an unsung hero. So hopefully coming out of today's workshop presentation, you'll have a little better understanding of what they are, how you can make best use of them. So just to align on what we're going to do today, we are going to briefly discuss what is a workflow, why you would want to use a workflow or how to use workflows. And then we're just going to jump right into kind of a demo. And we'll be in the platform. We will go through the process of creating a workflow. We will then use those workflows to make permission changes. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and why you would want to do that. We'll look at workflow rules, which is a very powerful solution that we have. And then we will kind of close it out by looking at what our workflows can do for us from a reporting perspective. And then we should have time at the end for any questions. So what is a workflow? Well, a workflow in the Irius Risk platform is a solution that really helps us identify the current state or phase in which your project exists. It's a very common practice that really can help us align to our developmental life cycle. We can look at it, we can align with our life cycle process, our development processes, or you can have your own unique workflow inside the platform. And it really just helps us understand, hey, is this a new project? Is it kind of in the draft phase? Is it in some kind of review process? Or is it getting towards the completed stage? So why would I use a workflow? Well, just looking at the first bullet item, we can say that workflows really help us, or they really provide a systematic and structured way to analyze the entire software development process or lifecycle. They also facilitate collaboration among team members. It allows them to collectively contribute to threat modeling process. The way I like to think about that is getting the right teams involved at the right time. So we know that a lot of teams are involved in the threat modeling process. It really does take kind of the village to threat model an application. You might have DBAs involved, networking teams involved, security teams involved. And all your teams are very busy. We all have a lot of work on our plate. So the different workflow phases could be an indicator of what team needs to be involved at that specific time. So it's a really good way to facilitate effective collaboration in the threat modeling process. Workflows make our threat modeling more efficient. We reduce the likelihood of missing a step in our defined processes. So we know certain activities have to be done at certain stages of the development process or the threat modeling process. It also ensures consistency as it helps maintain consistency in the threat modeling practice across different projects or teams, ensuring that security analysis is conducted uniformly. right? So if we have a workflow, we're doing the same thing each time. So that's how we're creating kind of that uniformity in our practices. And then one of the things that I really like about workflows is it helps me prioritize my team's activities. Our teams are sometimes small in numbers, and once again, we have lots of work in front of us. If we have a certain number of projects that are towards the near completed phase, we may want to prioritize that work over maybe the 10 models that are just in that initial draft phase. We know those have a long way to go. Or maybe we have a few projects that are towards the end, and we can look at the workflow and say, oh, hey, let's focus on these 3 projects here and let's get those over the finish line. Workflows often act as a gate as well, noting that certain activities must be completed before we allow the project to advance to the next phase. So much like we manage our projects, for the project managers that are on the call, we know there are certain phase gates within projects. So that's the concept behind that. Obviously, it's tracking the progress of a project. So as your leadership needs visibility into the progress, workflows are a very good way to communicate to them, this is where our projects are currently at in the threat modeling journey. We can use workflows to trigger actions. This is very important, and in my opinion, probably either maybe one of the most important and maybe underutilized functions of workflows. So I look forward to demoing what that looks like here in just a few minutes. But noting that our platform leverages the conditional engine that executes activities based on certain conditions. So workflows allow us to create or act upon certain conditions within the platform. And that'll make more sense, I think, as we walk through that. And then finally, we can change permissions to roles as the project moves to different phases of, moves through our workflows. So an example of that would be if I have a workflow or if I have a project that's in a developmental workflow state, I may allow my development team or my development role to have a very large amount of capabilities through permissions when it's in that phase. But when the project is towards the end of its process or more towards the end of the workflow phases, we can reduce their permissions, thereby ensuring that the model doesn't get changed or certain things do not happen to the model that could prevent it from moving, further down the road. Once again, I think that'll make a little more sense as we take a look at the platform. So enough slides. I know we all see plenty of slides. So let's jump over to the Areas Risk platform. What we're looking at here is just a very basic project. And as you can see, I'm currently just in that initial draft phase. And so here are the different workflows. And I can move my project into these different workflow phases just by clicking this next workflow. So you can see now I'm in development. But how are we doing this? Where does this come from? So where you would want to go is let's back out to our main Areas Risk platform screen and go to workflow. Now, as you can see here, I have 4 phases that currently exist. And anytime I create a project, it will begin in draft phase. Now, if you wanted to change that, you can easily move these around. You see what I did there? I just kind of grabbed that little 4-way arrow and I can move it around. So if you've, there we go. If you've created workflows and you're playing with them and you're like, I need to rearrange them, it's very easy to do just by dragging dragging them to different positions. One thing I want to call out also is when you make changes to workflows, it's very important for you to come up here and click this apply changes, or the work you do will be lost if you leave this area without applying the changes. Let's go ahead and create a workflow though. Let's create a different phase. Let's create just a final phase. So let's just say we want to create, this final phase. Final. We'll just say this when it's here, the model is completed. We'll come back to this section right here in a little bit, but you'll notice we have the ability to lock the threat model as well. So let's say for our scenario, because it is in the final phase, we don't want any additional work to occur to this threat model. We're going to go ahead and lock it. And this is a very common practice. And as you can see there, we have our final workflow phase created. Once again, I can move this around if I want to. I'm going to go ahead and apply these changes. So now that when I go back to my threat model, I'll have a final phase in there. And when the project moves into this final phase, it will be locked and no additional changes can be made to the actual threat model. Now let's say we want to modify what people can do within these different phases. So if you go to the bottom down here, you'll notice that we have a default permission set. What that means is we are inheriting the default permissions from the platform. So under users, you can see the roles, and if I'm in a development role and I'm assigned certain permissions within my development role, that's the permissions I'm going to have within the project when it's in this phase. But if I want to do something more custom, let me go ahead and apply those changes. I can now come in here and say, you know what, when it's in this phase, I do not want these people to be able to do anything to these countermeasures. I'm going to take these permissions away, or I can add permissions. Maybe there are things I want them to be able to do. So it really gives me a lot of flexibility on who can do what at the certain phases of the project based on its workflow state. Right? I think that's. I hope that's very clear. This is a very commonly used or a common use case for workflows. If customers that I work with aren't really doing a lot of actions around workflows or building workflow rules, I would say the most common thing that they're doing with workflows is modifying these permissions to the different roles based on the state of the workflow. It really just ensures consistency and kind of protects the threat model, right? All right, so that is it for just the permissions. So we can just cancel that, save those. So let's look at workflow rules. So if we go under rules, go to workflows. Workflow, we have the ability to create rules based on the state of the project, meaning where does the project exist within a workflow. So we have a multitude of conditions that we can create or select from. If a custom field has a value, if a project is moving to a different state, we can say that's a condition, and then we can take many actions. So just as an example, let's say hypothetically, we want to automatically create some reports when we move a project into a certain phase. So let's say our project is moving into one of the more final phases, and we know that we're going to have to create some reports and share them with our leadership, or maybe your security champion is going to come into the project and have to review these reports. And instead of making that person go through the process of generating every one of those reports, or maybe there's a certain compliancy report that you want to generate, they don't have to know the standards that have been applied. You could create a rule that says, hey, when I do this, I want you to automatically create these reports. So let's just take a look at how we would do that. So to start off, we would create a workflow rule, and we would say that, hey, the state has been entered. So in our condition, we have a GRC state, and I've said when the project moves into this state, and noting that this custom field is not equal to complete, so there's some logic that you have to do here. We're going to set one custom field to this value. So we would just need to, in order to support this, you would want to come into custom fields here, and you would go through the process of creating custom fields. That is a little outside the scope of this presentation, but we have good documentation around creating custom fields. So, once again, a little outside the scope of this presentation, but you would want to do that. So we've got these custom fields and we're setting some values. So basically we're creating some conditions. We're building in some logic in order for the rules engine to be able to execute what we want. Once again, what we're trying to accomplish is just automatically generating some reports. So a fairly basic function, but you do kind of have to think through this. And actually, it's very important that we actually have two custom fields here. And I'll explain a little bit more about why we would need to do that. So if we go to the rules editor now, drop this down. This is where we're actually going to generate the report. But we have to set up a condition in which we don't continuously generate reports, right? We just want the reports created one time. We don't want every time the rules engine to fire that we create another report and another report and another report. So that's where we'll look at those custom fields and how we built that logic out to ensure that it doesn't continuously loop and end up creating thousands of reports for the same project. So our rule states, hey, does this custom field, does it equal this value? And we set this value in the workflow. Remember, we said, hey, when it moves into this workflow state, I want you to set this particular custom field to the value of final. I said, okay, well, if that's true, if that's the condition, we're going to generate a custom risk summary report in PDF format, and then we're going to set this other field to complete. Now let's go back to our workflow rules. And if we look at our second and final workflow rule, we're looking for that second field to equal complete. And then what we'll do is we'll set the first custom field to complete. And what that does is that breaks the cycle. Because if we don't set this to complete, that means it will always be set to final. Right? Remember, we set custom field value to final, and in the rule we're looking for that value. Well, if we don't change that value every time the rules engine runs, go back here, we would be meeting this condition, and therefore we would continuously loop and loop and loop and create more and more reports. So just a little bit of thought that you have to put into creating some of these rules. Let's see that in action. Let's go back to our workflow. Let's come here. Let's go to the diagram. So we've moved it to security review. Now we're in GRC, and we'll run this. We'll just update the rules engine. Give that a second to run. And of course, the expected outcome will be that we'll go into our reports here in a second, and we should see a summary report created for us. And then we'll also take a look at those custom fields, which I've kept visible for the demonstration purposes. All right, so if I go to reports, you can see I'd created one the other day, obviously doing some testing as someone who's always trying to be prepared to do demonstrations does. But you can see this summary report was created right now. So the rule worked. Now we'll take a look at those custom fields that we created. You'll see those under the special fields. And you can see both of those are now set to complete, which means if I rerun the rules engine, the condition to generate that report no longer exists. And therefore, you can see we're not creating a second report. Now, if I were to back out of this certain condition, if I were to back out into, say security review, and I were to go back into the project details and clear these values out and move back into the GRC phase, we would create the scenario again for which the rules engine would execute and create the report again. Now, under normal conditions, you would probably mark these custom fields that they were not editable, that you cannot, or not even visible. Because this is really just, you're just creating logic that it really needs to be behind the scenes, and your practitioners really do not need to interface with those custom fields. So just kept those visible to really just show you how that's done. But like I said, in their normal production scenarios, those wouldn't be visible or editable by your practitioners. So let's go back to workflows. Now, one of the things we can do with workflows is we can affect our reporting. And how would we do that? Well, if we go into a specific workflow state, what we can do is we can watermark our reports, well, with anything really, if we wanted to, but the normal practice is to watermark your report with the workflow state. Meaning that if I go in and I run a report against a project that happens to be in the GRC workflow state, all the reports will have a GRC watermark against them. And you can select which reports, and of course it would be standard that you would select all your reports. I mean, if you're going to watermark one report, why wouldn't you just watermark them all? But you have that flexibility. You can watermark them with really anything that you'd want to based on that state. So let's go see that in practice. Now, if we go back to our project and go into our project, and we'll go to those reports, and I'll go ahead and download this real quick. And let me, give me 1 second and I will open that report. Okay. So as we scroll down, we can see that we have the GRC watermark. And this is beneficial as you share these reports with your leadership or whoever your program manager is. So when they're looking at a report, they understand very quickly what state your project is in. And that could save you some headache, right? If your project doesn't have a lot of threats addressed, if you've not implemented a lot of countermeasures, if you're not compliant with any kind of standard, but your project is in kind of an initial draft phase, that would be expected. But if you share a report to, maybe one of your program managers and they don't see much activity, and they make an assumption of where it's at in its project lifecycle, you may not have a great conversation with the particular individual. They may get frustrated and say, "Well, how come there's no work being done on this?" It's like, well, there's no work, but because we've just begun. So it could just be a good way of helping you avoid, frustration with your leadership, and really just giving them a quick indicator of where they are within the life cycle of the project. So looking at my list, that pretty much covers workflows and what you can do with them. So I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions.
Nothing has come through, but of course, if anything is in your mind now, then obviously please do ask while we've got Chris here.
Yeah, like I think we started the presentation, we don't see a lot of, well, I will say this, the large organizations that I work with, they use workflows. They mainly use them to modify those permissions. But as I work with those organizations more and more, they are really beginning to understand how they could leverage workflows more effectively. And they're starting to align more and more with their developmental life cycle. Sometimes you come out of the gate working with workflows just to just to track your progress of the threat model within serious risk. But they are discovering that if they align those states with how applications and infrastructure is actually developed, it helps them maintain an alignment with those individuals that are doing the work. So a very powerful solution within the platform, a little underutilized, yes, but I'm seeing more and more effective use of it in the last year. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at workflows. If you have questions on workflows, if you want some assistance on developing them, or just talk through best practices, you can always reach out to your success manager, and we can set up some time with my team to join some calls with you and kind of dig into this a little deeper.
We have also had one question come in. So how many resources do large organizations dedicate to the ongoing management of this tool?
Usually it's one team that is I wouldn't say dedicated. It is a responsibility of theirs. It is usually some type of security team that manages the platform. But I would say the administrative overhead of the platform is very, very low because it is a SaaS platform. So there's most of the, I guess, underlying administration is taken care of for you. Once most things are set up in place, like if you're configuring SSO or other things like that, that's kind of a one-time deal. But it's usually just one team that is kind of dedicated, if you will, to the ongoing management of the solution.
Well, thank you. So if there are no other questions, doing one last check. No, then I think we can wrap up this session. Thank you very much, Chris. That was really insightful. Always looking to ways to further automate to work smarter. So thank you very much. We have got another session 2 weeks today where we'll be looking at customizing content, components in particular. So you can find the details on that link that we've just shared. So thank you all very much for joining, and we hope to see you all again very soon.